Stepping on
us. We're in this series on worship scenes. We're just looking at various scenes, right? Just picking up from the Old Testament. Eventually we're going to get into the New Testament, and we're just talking about various moments in the history of man where he recognizes the need to pause and worship God. What did they do? Why did they do it, right? How did they worship? And we're just trying to learn some things initially from those Old Testament examples to just kind of get us a sense of how it is people presented themselves before God, why it was that they would make that decision. And then ultimately, once we're finished with this part of our series, we'll jump into the New Testament, we'll bridge between what they were doing and what's commanded and instructed in the New Testament and see if we can't see some similarities and contrasts when we get to that point. But here this evening, I want to run back real quick into this Exodus account in Exodus chapter 12 that we were just finishing up Sunday morning. Had a couple of leftover things that I wanted to make sure it gave an opportunity for us to talk about. And once we do that, then we'll bounce out of the days of Moses into the days of the priests and kings. And we'll talk about those three scenes that are in your lesson sheets that address a different time period in some senses, but I think we're going to see some very similar kinds of things happening in those three narratives as well. But before we get any further in our discussion this evening, if you would, let's bow our heads together and let's share in a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the day you've given us, the blessings of life that you bestow upon us, this opportunity that we have to open our Bibles, to share in a study of your word, to appreciate the testimony of it. We're so thankful, Father, for the gift of your knowledge that you share with us within the Scriptures. Give us a heart of receptiveness. Give us a desire to want to worship you and to honor you as so many have before us. Strengthen us in our study tonight. Encourage us in every righteous endeavor. We pray all these things through thy Son's name. Amen. All right, so we, at the very end of our discussion out of Exodus chapter 12, what was going on there, by the way? Passover, right? That's the Passover text. And it's one of those interesting things because it's one of those moments where we've studied a lot about worship scenes that happened as reactions to the moment, right? And we've had discussions about what did they do when they crossed the Red Sea and how they worshiped as a reaction to that moment. This is different because this worship was established before the event ever took place. God tells them, this is what you're going to do to prepare for the Passover, and you're going to do all of these things. And number one, it's going to save you when I bring the death of the firstborn upon Egypt, when that event, that last plague occurs. But he also adds that then this is going to be a perpetual worship to God from this point forward in their history. And in the latter end of the text, we even learned that they are supposed to teach and share with their children what this Passover message was about. Why were they doing all these things? Why did they use the blood of a lamb or a goat? Why did neighbors come together if they were a small family and couldn't eat on their own the entirety of the sacrifice? Why did we get rid of leaven out of our house for 7 days, right? Why did we do all these things? Someday your kids are going to ask you why, and you're not going to say, ask me later. You're going to answer. Right? You're going to let them know why it is that they were observing the Passover. The bridge I made at the conclusion of our study was the fact that we ought to be doing the same thing. We ought not be coming into this building day after day, week after week, opportunity after opportunity, come and go, and never spend any time helping our children know why it is we come here. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? How is it that God wants us to honor and worship Him in New Testament context? And I felt like that was one lesson that we could learn from them there in Exodus chapter 12. That they were commanded, and the truth is, did they always do a very good job with that? No, there were a lot of generations that come and went after them that didn't know anything about how it was they were supposed to behave. And the reason was nobody told them. Nobody taught them. You remember there's a king that comes later on, and when they find the book of the law, it was like, wow, right? We were supposed to be doing all of this? This is what God wanted from us? And so there were generations that came and went where the people didn't retain what God had wanted them to. And it created conflicts. We need to be doing the same. And that was one of the examples we had. Go ahead, Bob.
You know, last week when you asked the question, why did they have to have their shoes and everything ready back through there in Numbers 33,
Yeah.
where the Israelites was busy on the 15th day burying the death of the firstborns. So that is the reason the 10th plague,
Yeah.
to give the Israelites a head start on getting out of Egypt.
Yeah, you see, there's some divine wisdom going on in the methodology being used. What other worship examples? Anything that we left over? Anytime I end a class and I run out of time, I want to make sure I come back and give you a chance.
It says you kind of see later how they were never taught, later generations were never taught. It's kind of like, Jesus talking about the Pharisees. Yeah, they maybe went in and out, and did what they were supposed to. And if they were to ask, hey, why are you doing this? They could probably answer, but I don't think they truly understood, like, deep down the spiritual why they had to do what they did.
Yeah.
And so that's why Jesus called them hypocrites. They did it, but they ended up just doing it for show, not for actual glory of God.
And sometimes you'll see that. Any other leftover thoughts out of that text? And it's fine if you don't, by the way. I always just want to make sure I come back. All right, let's go on then. So let's jump into a different segment. Go over into 1 Samuel. And I thought I had, maybe I didn't. I got the 2 Samuel text, but that's too soon. Let's go back into 1 Samuel first. 1 Samuel chapter 6. And let's look, or I'm sorry, chapter 2. I'm thinking 2 Samuel chapter 6. My own charts have got me wrong. But 1 Samuel chapter 2. Who are we dealing with here? Yeah, just as soon as I ask, then it pops up on the screen. That's a help, isn't it? But anyway, we're talking specifically about who is she, by the way? Okay, mother of Samuel. That's generally that we think of her first. Who's her husband? Elkanah, or Elkanah, however you want to say that. None of us really know for sure how those Old Testament names were pronounced. You just kind of guesswork most of the time. But he in chapter 1, and he, not to go down this road, but was she his only wife? No, she was not. But she was his only wife that didn't have what? Didn't have children. And did that bother her? Yeah, very deeply. It bothered her very deeply. You read chapter 1, and you'll see how deeply it bothered her. In fact, there were many times where she's praying so fervently in her mind that she's doing what? Yeah, she's moving her lips, right? She's so fervent in her mind in prayer about these things that her lips, and what was she accused of? You're drunk, right? They were at this feast, and she's over there praying about not having, and Elkanah, he would even say, am I not good enough? Right? And did he take care of her, by the way? Yeah, he favored her, in fact, the text teaches us. She was favored with him, and he even makes the statement, am I not better than many sons that you could have in terms of being treated? But she's been convinced that if she doesn't have a son and something happens to him and she doesn't get along with the other, and that's a strange concept for us to grasp, I get it, but she's afraid she won't be cared for. And so she continues to pray and pray and pray and pray that she will ultimately have a child, and eventually what? She does, Samuel. Promise to the Lord, right? In service to Him. So that's the backdrop. I wanted you to think about that before we get in to the text itself. So Hannah in particular is worshiping here in this scene, and they're worshiping because she finally has a son. Let's read the first 11 verses of 1 Samuel chapter 2. Hannah prayed after she has him. Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoiceth in the Lord. Mine horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over mine enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. There is none holy as the Lord, for there is none beside thee, neither is there any rock like our God. Talk no more so exceeding proudly, yet not arrogancy come out of your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by Him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty men are broken, and they that stumbled are girded with strength. They that were full have hired out themselves for bread, for they that were hungry cease, so that the barren hath borne 7, and she that hath many children is waxed feeble. The Lord killeth and maketh alive. He bringeth down to the grave and bringeth up. The Lord maketh poor and maketh rich. He bringeth low and lighteth up. He raiseth up the poor out of the dust, and lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill, to set them among princes, and to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and He hath set the world upon them. He will keep the feet of His saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness, for by strength shall no man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Out of heaven shall He thunder upon them. The Lord shall judge the ends of the earth, and He shall give strength unto His king, and exalt the horn of His anointed. And Elkanah went to Ramah to his house, and the child did minister unto the Lord before Eli and the priest. And so it's fascinating, right? That language sounds, in its themes, sounds a lot like whose song? Yeah, Mary and Moses, right? It sounds a lot that when we studied that song of Moses, it sounds similar to that, right? It's all about what God had done. We can sing about what God has done, and we can pray about what God has done. I don't know that we often think about prayer as being a forum, if you will, an avenue to bring before the throne of God the kind of God that He is and has been and has proven Himself to be. It's interesting, right? Because generally we think of prayer as the way, that's where we ask God of things. That's where we show some expressions of thanksgiving, but she is extremely detailed in her understanding of the power and ability that God has. He can make he can make sure that those who might not handle riches very well stay without them. He can take those who have riches and use them well. He can take a strong, mighty man with a bow and render him pointless and useless. He can, right? Her descriptions are over and over again a celebration, because it's interesting. There's a moment when you kind of think, oh, okay, that's Hannah, when she references what in that prayer? Is she a mighty man with a bow? No. What was she in that prayer? Go back and look. She says it. Yeah, she's the barren woman. She's the woman, right, that couldn't have a child, didn't have a child, didn't have a child, didn't have a child, didn't have a child, prayed about it, prayed about it, prayed about it, prayed about it, and then finally has him. She recognizes what God can do when it seems hopeless. Right? Situations that seem like they can't be turned. Situations that seem like there's no answer. No way even God Himself could provide any kind of resolve to these challenges. Even those difficult situations, she prays here in 1 Samuel chapter 2, the fact that God can even overcome those kinds of things. What I love about her is she has no hesitation about her confidence is in what God can do, and she wants to bring that worship before His throne as it relates to those things. So what acts of worship? And I just in case you say, so what do you? I see. What's the most obvious? Prayer, right? That's the most obvious one because it kind of almost outlines it for us that way. Do you see anything else there, though? Okay, you can see faith that motivates that. You see anything else as an act of worship besides prayer? Adoration. Okay, adoration, right? mean, she's doing, the mechanics is prayer, right? The means by which she's doing this is by prayer. But there are variations to the kinds of things that she's presenting in this prayer. There's adoration, there's thanksgiving, there's respect, there's reverence. There's all kinds of aspects of the kinds of ways that we've already studied in our class about the reverence needed to worship properly.
Kind of goes actually along with the next question, but I believe in verse 2 or 3, she describes God as a rock, and I've noticed a lot about that throughout the entire Bible. Can you explain what it means when they describe God as a rock?
Well, they would have to. Rock was always foundational, right? Anytime you're going to build something, a structure of any type, you would dig until you could hit rock, so that you would have a strong. So God is always the rock, the foundation, that which stands under, keeps us strong, and so you see that in the Psalms. You see it in various texts as it relates to that imagery. Any other things you think? So then we see God described as His power and all the reverence. So what do we learn? What do we learn from this prayer? And I don't mean necessarily what do we learn about God. I think those are things we can appreciate out of the text. But what do we learn about worship from this prayer? Okay, so we've talked about this, right? And by the way, there's similar things here that we've already seen. But so praise ought to be part of our worship. Whether we're singing it, whether we're praying it, whatever the mechanism is, praising God for who He is ought to be part of that. What else do you see about the way she worshiped here? Did I hear the word fervent? Yeah, right? She go back to chapter 1 as well. When you think about all the moments leading up to this one, but she's fervent in prayer. That's why she has him to begin with. Don't stop petitioning the Father, because His character that she describes in her prayer in chapter 2 is always accurate. And so we don't always know how He's going to act or what's His will in certain circumstances, but don't ever underestimate Him, right? And she's fervent in that prayer, in that effort. What else you see?
And worshiping God.
Yeah. So and here's what so what you see in her is she recognizes I finally have this child that I wanted, couldn't have, and it didn't become about her. After she bears Samuel, it becomes about her appreciation for God delivering him to her.
Through the Bible, you see a lot of people, like women wanting children and not getting them and having to wait, and they keep praying. I think one of the things this ends up teaching is that you keep praising God and have patience through it, because no matter, you could ask for something and the answer may be no, or the answer may be wait. So you still keep worshiping God throughout, no matter how long it takes.
Right. So there's again that consistent fervency in worship. Anything else you wrote down that you notice about her act of worship here? Humility. Yeah, there's humility here. Anytime we worship God, there needs to be a level of humility, right? We are the created. He is the creator, and we ought to have a healthy respect for that. And I think she obviously does, and she presents that. Anything else? I'm not.
Even though she knows she isn't going to have him through his years, she's going to have him until he's weaned, and then he's with Eli.
Yeah, think about that. She's willing to worship God even though she knows that she's got some tough challenges as it relates to this whole circumstance, and she doesn't withhold praise to God, even though he's going to become servant to Eli pretty quickly. All right, so jump to the next text. That's 2 Samuel chapter 6. 2 Samuel chapter 6, and I'm going to bounce it. We're going to start later in the text, and then we'll bounce back here in just a moment. But so start in verse 11 or 12, and let me just share a couple of verses with you, and then let's talk about what happens, and then we'll talk a little bit about the whys as it relates to this. So the Ark of the Covenant's been continuing in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, for 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household while it was there. And it was told King David, saying, The Lord hath blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that pertaineth unto him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness. And it was so that when they bare the ark of the Lord had gone, when they that bare the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed oxen and fatlings. And David danced before the Lord with all his might, and David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. Now, that's an interesting kind of moment to start, right? Because that doesn't really help us understand the reasoning. We know what's going on. The ark's been for 3 months at Obed-Edom's place. David learns that through that 3-month period that the ark has been resting at Obed-Edom's household, that the Lord has continually blessed that household while it was there. But what we haven't read yet is, why was it there to begin with? Okay, so if you go back in chapter 6, earlier, that's the story of whom we usually remember it as. That's Uzzah, right? That's the account of Uzzah. Right before this is when they had tried to move the ark and deliver it out of the hands of the Philistines and move it back, and they put it on a cart rather, and they begin to move it, and you remember the scene. It begins to become unstable, and Uzzah reaches out and touches it, and God does what? Strikes him down right there.
He did what most of us would probably do.
Right. And so yeah, right, that he faced the consequence, the warning. Now, right, there's always that debate. Well, there's a lot wrong with that scene, right? It shouldn't have been moved on that cart to begin with, and there's a lot wrong with it. But it seems as though Uzzah breaches a barrier that God just simply couldn't tolerate, for lack of a better word. And how did David react to that, if you read the earlier text or just remember it from your studies? Yeah, he's a little bit upset about it. He's I don't want to say confused, but I don't know what a better word is. He's thinking, well, wow, why does, and so he just stops, right? His effort was to try to get it back, get the ark back to Jerusalem, but he's not so sure now. And so it ends up here at Obed-Edom's place, and David just kind of leaves it there for the period of 3 months. And he ultimately learns, as we read there, that God seems to be okay right now, right? In relation, that nothing bad happened to Obed-Edom, nothing occurred. And so maybe it's time to do what? Let's try it again, right? Let's try to move it again. And I've often found it interesting, and we can maybe have a quick discussion about why. But so when they that bear the ark, now we're doing what? By the way, yeah, we're carrying it right this time, right? We're doing this right this time. So when they that bear the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps. I don't know that we have an answer to this specifically, but there might be. Why 6? Well, I'm not bad with numbers. What's after 6? 7. Isn't that it?
6 is one short of 7, so how they did it wasn't quite perfect.
Yeah. So they stopped short of what would be thought of as complete. Right? 7 is generally thought of as a complete number, something that makes something perfected. Now again, you're looking at me and I'm going, this is pure speculation. I'm just giving you food for thought when you're trying to figure out why 6. But it seemed interesting to me that because, you know, if it's just a test, one, right? One, and we look around, and are we all still standing here? Yeah, okay. But 6 spaces, 6 steps, and let's pause before that 7th, and let's do what? Yeah, this worship. Now think about that. We're going from Obed-Edom's place, and we got to get this all the way back to the city of David, right? We got to get but we went 6 whole steps, and we stopped the process. And before we take that 7th, we worship. Before we take one more step towards completing this task, we stop to worship. And I'll talk maybe more about that when we get through the text itself, of some things we can think about, but it fits more of our final question than it does right now. But just get those images in your mind. And again, it's interesting, right? So he sacrificed oxen and fatlings, and he danced before the Lord with all his might. I no more than know why 6 than I do what that looked like, right? The word leaped and danced is used later in the narrative. But I have no idea. I have no idea what that looked like, except for it's celebratory, right? They're worshiping God. We are on the move again with the Ark of the Covenant. And before we go one step further towards completion, we're going to sacrifice the oxen, we're going to sacrifice the fatlings. David dances before the Lord with all his might. He's girded with a linen ephod. And so David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. And so it's an interesting kind of moment. And we talked about all 3, A, B, and C. We've already answered all those. So how would you describe this worship then? Try to put yourself in David's shoes for a minute. What's going through your mind? Right, you're remembering 3 months ago. The last time we tried this, a man lost his life. And this time we're going to do it. We're going to do it right. This time we're going to do it right. God didn't approve of our first attempt. This time we're going to do it right. We're going to do it as God has instructed us. We're going to fulfill these things as God has given us commands as it relates to the ark and those things. How else would you describe it? Right. He's excited. We're doing it right. God's not upset with us. And the ark's going to get back to where it belongs, right? Back to the city of David, back to Jerusalem where it belongs. This is an exciting time. Remember, generally speaking, now, over the generations, Israel had some false concepts about just because the ark's presence was there, that no matter what they did would be blessed of God. They make some mistakes that way. But yet they just learned that the whole time it was sitting in Obed-Edom's house, good things happened. We need to get the ark and get it back. So this is an exciting time for them to be moving that. So they're excited. So that's their worship to God is coming from that excitement that they have as the ring. And I'll leave that for the end. Go ahead. I keep thinking of extra things. Go ahead.
It's a celebration.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it's a celebratory worship. We've seen it there's no reason to deny it, right? We've seen it over and over and over again in the text that we've looked at in these Old Testament passages. There were much of their worship was in celebration of something God had done and some benefit that He had brought. Are you talking about the form, or are you talking about the celebratory mindset of worship? Because I think the form is fitting for the time, right? And so the form for us, and we'll get there in our discussion eventually when we move into New Testament, but I would argue absolutely our worship could absolutely have celebratory motivations and tones using the instructive guidance that God has given us on how He wants to be worshiped in New Testament times. I don't think just because, and I'm not saying you're saying this, by the way, but we certainly have guided instructions of how God wants to be worshiped in the New Testament, but I don't know that He's ever restricted the mode, right, in terms of the intent and the motive behind why we're doing. We should be celebratory, and we talked a little bit about that in our study so far. We'll do a little bit more. Yeah, let Him sing. Yeah, and so I think there is, something to be learned here. And again, we've used this qualifier throughout our study that we can't learn from necessarily the mechanics of what they're doing. It's a different time period, right? It's an Old Testament authoritative time period. So you can't mimic their mechanics and assume God will accept it because He did under the Old Testament. But the motives and the intents and things, I think you'll see them absolutely mirrored in the New Testament.
King James Version uses pace instead of steps.
Yeah.
The American Standard uses paces instead of steps.
Yeah.
NIV uses steps.
Yeah.
If it's paces, it could be a distance to equal from where they took it to the tent that David had prepared. If
When I looked up
a different distance for a pace.
When I looked up the word pace, the original word was the length of a hand. Yeah. Was when I looked it up, because I did the same thing. I saw steps, I saw pace, and so I looked up and I have to go back. I could probably do that real quick. I'm pretty sure that's what I read, but I'll double check it, and it'll come up on the screen, but you'll never be able to read it from where you're sitting there. Let me get my pencil out because it'll be easier. But I'll double check it, Bob, real quick, if I can do anything quick tonight. But I'm pretty sure. Oop. Screen moved on me when I switched the. Remind me of what verse that is, Bob. I lost it. 13. Okay. There it is. So this, by definition, it simply says a pace or regular step. A regular step. So, and I think I read in a different dictionary where they considered that to be basically.
Mile that they traveled with the ark to the tent.
Yeah. So, and I think that right, because they keep going then, right? The sacrifices and the worship starts, and then they just keep that celebratory worship going as they keep moving. And so I think the pause happens quickly. And then they pause, they begin the worship, and then they just continue that worship as they continue to move forward.
Do you think that, considering 7 being, I guess, the number of weakness, or a 7 being the number of perfect, that David might have known that, because he knew we aren't perfect. So to stop short, possibly to represent we're not perfect, yet we're still going to worship God.
Yeah. I mean, we we don't know, right? We don't know what's in his mind as to why, because he didn't tell us. I gave you some food for thought, why it might be, but maybe, right? And same with what I said, maybe. But he doesn't really give us any specifics on that.
Thing, or do you think?
Again, you'd be curious. I would imagine you probably. It's a horrible illustration, but you ever, if anybody ever been in the military, you go on a run, and one guy will chant it out, and then you'll repeat it, and the guy will chant it out, and you'll repeat it, and other some camps and stuff I've been to do that kind of thing, and so probably something like that where you've got this call response going on, because that's common to their worship, but I don't know whether we don't know. It seems just very spontaneous in that sense. There's no script.
Did you guys already study when they opened up the law of Moses?
Not in this series.
Okay. Well, it's just, I think there's just reactions to what we see when it comes to God approved. You see dancing and celebration here and shouting.
Yeah.
You see, one thing I found interesting is David is wearing a linen ephod. That's really designed for priests. There's this kind of this expectation, if they're doing the right thing, they've gotten the gist. And there's celebration that's God approved. And the same way, I mean, when we look at Nehemiah, and when they read the law of Moses, you saw a different reaction, upset. They thought, the idea that they was not doing the right thing for this long, I think you kind of hinted on it at the beginning.
Yeah.
There's this response because now it's finally God approved.
Sure. And it is interesting. David in kind of one moment behaves above his station and below his station, all at the same time, right? The appearance of a priest. But if you read further in the text, when Michal sees him come to town, Saul's daughter's wife, she sees him come to town. She's mortified, right? She's embarrassed. She's embarrassed at what she sees in him. So it's interesting, the very odd dynamic in this picture of worship that's happening here with David and the ark. Go ahead, Bob.
1 Chronicles 15:26 states that God had helped the Levites who were carrying the ark, and 7 bulls and 7 rams were sacrificed.
Yeah.
So if you use one for each, that's 14 stops to make sacrifices.
Yeah. It is. They're not getting anywhere in a hurry. Yeah, they're not getting anywhere in a hurry. And you're right. If you add other contexts that share the same account, different details, you get even a bigger picture of how detailed they're making sure that they honor God every step, right? Every step of the way. This has got to be about the Lord.
Through when they made it back.
Yeah.
How long that must have been.
Yeah. And quite a sight, I imagine, quite a sight of a worship, right? I was talking to some folks earlier tonight, and I was say it on a live stream, won't say the place, but I was in a location recently in a town, and I was coming down the street, and there was a religious body that had there had to have been 20 people lined up down the street, and they had signs, but they were giving away T-shirts. I don't even know what religious of some type or kind, and literally I'm stopped at a traffic light and the guy's like beating on my window, and I thought, am I got to get accosted? And I'm like, no, the guy just wants me to take a T-shirt. But here's my point though, and I'm critical. It sounds like I'm critical, and I'm not necessarily, because they didn't have any reservations whatsoever about displaying their respect and love for the Lord right there in the middle of the street. Right? Think about this entourage coming out of Obed-Edom's place. And it's this celebration that just goes for all to see. For all to see. No reservations whatsoever, no hesitations about letting anybody and everybody know that the Lord God was being celebrated and worshiped as they returned His ark back to its proper place. It's just food for thought. Bell rang. I'll come back, right? We haven't had a chance to talk about what worship lessons do we learn out of this text. So let me come back to that, Lord willing, on Sunday. We'll talk about some of those, give you a chance to think about it. Now that we've talked about it, maybe you can go home and maybe write down a few more things you see about worship here out of this scene and things that we can learn. And then we've got one more text out of the Old Testament that we're going to take a look at. It's the largest section of Scripture that I've given you in this series just for one segment. But it has to do with Solomon and the celebration that went along with the opening of the temple, right? And so I gave you more questions. If you noticed that in your lesson sheets, I gave you a lot more questions about that text. I gave you a little more deliberate kinds of questions out of certain verses out of those 66 we're going to look at. And so we'll come back, Lord willing, Sunday. We'll talk about key lessons that we can learn from this scene with David, and then we'll bounce to one more scene as it relates to the worship scenes that unfold there when the temple was dedicated in the days of Solomon. And then we'll stop out of the Old Testament. Well, there's lots more we could have done, but I think we've done enough to get the right kind of imagery and ideas that we need to get before we move into the New Testament conversation. So Sunday, I'll have that second half of this series available to you and get it up on the website as well, so you can have what we're going to look at examples-wise in the New Testament. Now, I know we could probably have, you're thinking to yourself, you went through the Old Testament, talked about worship, and you didn't bring up a single psalm. How do you do that, preacher? You know, I get it. But the Psalms are a songbook that they used in worship, right? The Psalms aren't worship in the sense that there's no scenes of worship. That was the book they used to sing their songs of worship. And so that's why I didn't really use the Psalms in this series, because we're talking about worship scenes where people are actually worshiping, whereas the Psalms are a series of 3 books that they used in order to worship. And that's why it's a little different.